The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Or maybe that was just the blood rushing in my ears as I watched him, my husband of 32 years, lean back in his chair with that smirk I'd somehow convinced myself was charming once. The judge was reading something, her voice steady and clear, but all I could focus on was the way his shoulders shook. He was laughing, actually laughing. At me, at this, at everything we'd supposedly built together. The sound of it cut through me like glass. Not the deep, warm laugh I'd fallen in love with in 1991, when he'd thought my terrible joke about construction workers was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. This was different. Contemptuous. Cold. A sound that said I was beneath him. That my pain was entertainment. That 32 years of my life had been a joke, and he'd finally decided to let me in on it. My lawyer's hand touched my arm, and I realized I'd stopped breathing. The fluorescent lights overhead made everything feel too bright, too exposed. I could see every scratch on the wooden table in front of me, every piece of lint on my navy suit jacket that Patricia had helped me pick out. The air smelled like old paper and floor polish and fear, my fear, metallic and sharp in the back of my throat. I wanted to disappear into the wooden bench beneath me, to sink through the floor and never surface. But then the judge's gavel came down, sharp and final, and something inside me shifted. This was real. This was happening. And somehow, I'd gotten here. Let me back up. 3 months earlier, I was still living in what I thought was my life. We lived in a modest ranch house in Phoenix, the kind with a front porch where you could watch the sunset paint the desert hills orange and purple. I'd picked out every piece of furniture in that house, arranged every photo on the mantel. 32 years of marriage captured in frames. Me and Robert at our wedding, both of us so young and hopeful. I was 27, he was 29, and we thought we knew everything about love and forever. Our kids at various ages, graduations, birthdays, holidays, Michael's high school football uniform, Emily's college acceptance letter, framed because I was so proud, Tyler's art projects that I couldn't bear to throw away, the grandkids, always the grandkids. 7 of them now, ranging from 3 to 15, each one a reminder that I'd built something that mattered. The house itself was nothing special, 800 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. The kitchen had outdated appliances and countertops I'd been meaning to replace for a decade. The carpet in the hallway was worn down to the padding in places from years of foot traffic, but it was mine, ours. I'd mopped those floors 1,000 times. I'd repainted the living room 4 different colors over the years, never quite satisfied but always trying. I'd planted the rose bush by the mailbox that bloomed pink every spring without fail. Robert worked in construction management, or at least he used to before he retired a few years back. He'd spent 35 years climbing the ladder from laborer to foreman to project manager, coming home every night with sawdust in his hair and stories about the idiots he had to supervise. I'd been a teacher's aide for most of my career, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills and gave me summers with the kids when they were little. I loved those kids at school, the ones who struggled to read, who needed extra patience and encouragement. I'd spend my lunch breaks working with them, watching their faces light up when something finally clicked. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, but we were comfortable. Or so I thought. We took modest vacations, a week at a cabin in Flagstaff every summer, occasional trips to visit the kids when they moved away. We ate out once a week, usually at the same Mexican restaurant where the waitress knew our order. We helped the kids with down payments on their houses, contributed to the grandkids' birthday parties and Christmas presents. We were doing fine. We were stable. We were safe. Or at least, that's the story I told myself. That's the narrative I constructed to make sense of my life. The thing about long marriages is they develop a rhythm. You stop questioning certain things because questioning feels like doubting, and doubting feels like betrayal. When Robert started handling all our finances after he retired, I didn't think twice about it. He'd always been good with numbers, better than me anyway. In the early years of our marriage, he'd balanced our checkbook by hand every month, catching errors I'd made, teaching me his system. When computers came along, he'd been the one to set up our online banking, to learn the software to track our expenses. It made sense that he'd take it over completely when he had more time. I had enough on my plate helping with the grandkids, keeping the house running, making sure his mother got to her doctor's appointments. Margaret, Robert's mother, was 83 and still living independently, but she needed help. Grocery shopping, prescription pickups, rides to physical therapy for her hip. I'd taken that on without question because that's what you do for family. Robert appreciated it, or at least he said he did. "I don't know what Mom would do without you," he'd tell me, and I'd feel warm with purpose, with being needed. "Don't worry your pretty head about it," he'd say whenever I asked about our accounts. Pretty head, like I was some delicate thing that couldn't handle the complexity of a bank statement, couldn't possibly understand the intricacies of deposits and withdrawals. The phrase should have irritated me, would have irritated me if anyone else had said it, but coming from Robert, I'd trained myself to hear it as affection, as protection, as him taking care of me so I didn't have to worry. But I let it slide because that's what you do, right? You pick your battles. You prioritize harmony over ego. Every marriage counselor, every advice column, every friend who'd been married longer than me said the same thing. Don't sweat the small stuff. Focus on what matters. Is it worth fighting over? And so I didn't fight. I nodded and smiled and went back to folding laundry or planning dinner or calling Margaret to schedule her next appointment. I pushed down the small voice inside me that whispered, maybe I should know what's in our accounts. Maybe I should have access. Maybe, "Don't worry your pretty head" isn't actually a compliment. I kept telling myself that family unity mattered more than knowing every detail of our financial situation. We were a team, partners. What difference did it make who actually logged into the bank accounts as long as we were both provided for? As long as the bills got paid and we had food on the table and the grandkids got their birthday money, what did it matter if I could see the actual numbers? That logic seemed sound at the time. Now, looking back, I can see how perfectly it set me up for what came next, how it gave Robert exactly the cover he needed, how it transformed my trust into his weapon. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when I volunteered at the community center, helping seniors, people my own age ironically, learn how to use computers. There was something deeply satisfying about teaching Mrs. Chen how to email her daughter in California, or showing Mr. Rodriguez how to video chat with his grandkids in Texas. They'd get so excited when it worked, when they could see their loved ones' faces light up on the screen. I'd drive home from those sessions feeling useful, feeling like I was making a difference in people's lives. I'd gotten home around 3, started dinner, the usual routine. Pot roast in the slow cooker, potatoes and carrots, the meal Robert had been requesting every Tuesday for the past 5 years. The house smelled rich and savory, comforting. Robert was in his recliner, scrolling through his phone, when I mentioned that my Social Security deposit seemed smaller than usual. The statement had come in the mail that morning. I still got paper statements because I liked having physical records, something I could hold and review. The number had caught my eye immediately. $237 less than it should have been. Not a huge amount, but enough to notice. Enough to make me pull out last month's statement and compare. "You must have read it wrong," he said without looking up. His eyes stayed fixed on his phone screen, thumb scrolling, face illuminated by that blue-white glow. He didn't even ask what the number was, didn't ask to see the statement, just dismissed it outright. But I hadn't read it wrong. I checked twice, even put on my reading glasses to make sure. The numbers were clear, $1,542 instead of $779. I stood there in the kitchen, holding the statement, wanting to push back but not knowing how. The pot roast bubbled quietly, the refrigerator hummed, and I felt something shift inside me, something small but significant, a hairline crack in the foundation of my trust. Still, I dropped it. Because that's what I did. I dropped things. I swallowed my concerns and told myself I must have been confused about the amount, even though I knew I wasn't. I filed the statement away in the drawer where I kept important papers and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't forget. Over the next week, it nagged at me. A persistent itch I couldn't scratch. I'd be washing dishes and think about that missing 237. I'd be watching TV and calculate how many groceries that could buy. I'd lie in bed at night and wonder where it had gone, why the amount had changed, whether I should ask Robert again or just let it go. The second crack came a week later when I tried to transfer some money to our grandson for his birthday and discovered our joint savings account had a balance of $473. We'd had over $15,000 in there the last time I'd checked, which admittedly had been months ago. Maybe a year. Time had a way of slipping past me lately. Days blending into weeks, blending into months. My hands went cold. That metallic taste flooded my mouth, the one you get right before you're about to throw up. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at that number like it might change if I looked at it long enough. $473. Where was the rest? Where had $15,000 gone? I clicked through the transaction history with shaking fingers. Transfers out, one after another. $500 here, $200 there, $3,000 in one chunk, all to an account number I didn't recognize, all on dates when Robert had been home alone, all without my knowledge or consent. When Robert came home from his golf game that evening, he'd taken up golf in retirement, played every Wednesday afternoon. I was still sitting there. The light had changed from afternoon gold to evening blue. I hadn't moved, hadn't started dinner, hadn't done anything except stare at those numbers and try to make them make sense. "Where's our money?" I asked. Not angry, not yet, just confused, genuinely, deeply confused. There had to be an explanation, a reasonable, logical explanation that would make this okay. He barely glanced at the screen, set down his golf clubs by the door, grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped it open. The hiss of carbonation, the crack of the can tab, sounds so ordinary against the backdrop of my dissolving reality. I moved it, better interest rate in another account. Relief flooded through me, warm and immediate. See? There was an explanation. He'd moved it. Better interest rate. That made sense. That was responsible financial planning. I started to relax, started to feel silly for the panic that had gripped me all afternoon. Which account? Jesus, Linda, do you need to micromanage everything? I said I'm handling it. The warmth drained away as quickly as it had come. The way he said my name, like it tasted bad in his mouth, made me flinch. There was an edge to his voice I didn't recognize, or maybe I'd been refusing to recognize it for longer than I wanted to admit. But I believed him. Or I wanted to believe him. Is there a difference? When you've spent 3 decades building a life with someone, when you've raised children and buried parents and survived cancer scares and job losses and all the ordinary disasters that make up a marriage, you find ways to explain away the things that don't add up. You tell yourself stories that make sense, that preserve the world you've constructed. So I told myself a story. Robert was handling our finances. He'd moved money to get a better return on our savings. He was annoyed that I was questioning him because it implied I didn't trust his judgment. If I could just be more supportive, more understanding, everything would be fine. That story lasted almost 6 more months. 6 months of telling myself everything was okay while my body kept score in ways I couldn't ignore. I started having headaches that wouldn't quit. The kind that sit right behind your eyes and pulse with every heartbeat, turning the world into something too bright, too loud, too much. I'd take Tylenol, Advil, whatever was in the medicine cabinet, but they barely took the edge off. The pain would recede just enough to let me function, then come roaring back. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, my chest tight like someone was sitting on it, my mind racing through conversations I should have had. Questions I should have asked. Why wouldn't he tell me which account he'd moved our money to? Why did he get so defensive when I asked simple questions? Why couldn't I shake this feeling that something was wrong? But when morning came, when the alarm went off and I had to get up and make breakfast and start the day, I'd swallow some Tylenol and push through. I had things to do. The grandkids needed watching. Emily was working full-time and needed me to pick up the twins from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Robert's mother needed her groceries picked up. The house needed cleaning. There was always something more important than my own discomfort, something that required me to function regardless of how I felt. I stopped going to my own doctor's appointments. Too expensive, I told myself, though we'd always had decent insurance through Robert's retirement plan. Too time-consuming, too much trouble. Dr. Kim's office was across town, and parking was impossible. And I'd have to sit in that waiting room for 45 minutes past my appointment time because they were always running late. The truth was, I didn't have the energy to face whatever might be wrong with me. If I didn't know, I didn't have to deal with it. Ignorance felt safer than acknowledgement. If there was something seriously wrong, if the headaches were a symptom of something bigger, if the chest tightness meant heart problems, if my body was trying to tell me something important, then knowing would mean I'd have to do something about it. And I didn't have the capacity to take on one more thing. My friend Patricia noticed I'd lost weight. We were at the community center, setting up for the computer class, and she grabbed my arm to get my attention. Her hand went all the way around my wrist, where it used to not quite close. "You're wasting away," she said, her eyes concerned. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" I couldn't remember. Food had started to feel optional, something I did when I happened to think about it. I'd make breakfast for Robert, eggs and toast the way he liked them, but I'd skip it myself. Lunch was whatever I could grab while I was out running errands, usually nothing. Dinner I'd cook but barely touch, pushing food around my plate while Robert ate and watched TV. My clothes hung looser. My wedding ring spun around my finger, the ring that used to be snug, that I'd had to have resized once in our 20s when I'd gained weight after having the kids. My face looked different in the mirror, sharper angles where there used to be softness, shadows under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. But I told Patricia I was fine, just busy, and changed the subject to the new curriculum we were developing for the computer class. She let it drop, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I could feel her watching me more closely after that, noticing things I was trying to hide. The exhaustion was the worst part. Not the normal tired you feel after a long day, but this bone-deep fatigue that made every task feel insurmountable. Getting out of bed required negotiation with myself. Just 5 more minutes. Just until the next commercial break. Just until I absolutely have to move or I'll be late. Showering felt like climbing a mountain. I'd stand under the water and have to resist the urge to just slide down and sit on the floor of the tub to let the water run over me while I did nothing. Getting dressed meant choosing from the same 3 outfits I'd been rotating through because making decisions was exhausting. Deciding what to wear, what to eat, what to do next. Every choice drained me a little more. And still, I kept going because what else was I supposed to do? Fall apart? That wasn't an option. I had people depending on me. Margaret needed her rides. The grandkids needed their grandmother. Robert needed his meals cooked and his house cleaned and his life maintained the way he expected it to be maintained. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn until much later, sitting in Sarah's office while she explained the statistics, was that research shows abused seniors have a 3 times higher risk of hospitalization. 3 times. My body was trying to tell me something my mind refused to hear. The headaches, the weight loss, the exhaustion, the chest pains, they weren't just stress. They were my body breaking down under the weight of what was being done to me. I was being used up, depleted, erased, and I was too busy keeping the peace to notice. Robert's behavior got stranger. He'd disappear for hours without explanation, come home smelling like cologne I didn't recognize. something expensive and musky, not the Old Spice he'd worn for 30 years. When I asked where he'd been, he'd accuse me of being paranoid, controlling, crazy. That word, crazy, started appearing more and more in our conversations. "You're being crazy, Linda. Why are you acting so crazy? I can't have a normal conversation with you when you're like this." Like what? Like someone who wanted to understand why her life savings were vanishing. Like someone who deserved basic respect and honesty from her husband. Like someone who noticed when things didn't add up and had the audacity to ask questions. But I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe watching the savings account dwindle was making me see threats that weren't there. Maybe the cologne was from trying samples at the department store, or from hugging someone at church, or from any number of innocent explanations that didn't involve what I was afraid it involved. Maybe I was losing my grip on reality. Maybe this was just what getting older felt like. Confused, uncertain, unable to trust your own perceptions. I'd read articles about cognitive decline, about how memory gets fuzzy and judgment gets impaired. Was that happening to me? Was I experiencing the early stages of dementia and that's why nothing made sense anymore? I stopped mentioning the money, stopped asking questions, because every time I did, I was made to feel like the problem. And if I was the problem, then fixing me would fix everything else, right? That's the logic that keeps you trapped. The belief that if you just try harder, do better, be more understanding, things will go back to how they used to be. If I could just stop being so suspicious, so demanding, so unreasonable, then Robert would be the man I married again. The man who used to laugh at my jokes and hold my hand in the car and tell me I was beautiful even when I was 9 months pregnant and swollen like a balloon. But things never go back. They only move forward, whether you're ready or not. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything changed. I was at home, folding laundry in the living room, sorting Robert's t-shirts from the towels, matching socks in pairs, and rolling them the way I'd been doing for 32 years. The TV was on in the background, some talk show I wasn't really watching, just noise to fill the silence. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Patricia usually called first. The grandkids were in school. My heart did this weird skip-thump thing it had been doing lately, another symptom I was ignoring. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 40s, professional-looking, holding a folder. She wore a gray pantsuit and had dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She didn't look threatening, but she also didn't look like she was selling something or collecting for charity. I opened the door part way, the chain still on. A habit I'd developed recently, this need to keep a barrier between myself and the world. "Mrs. Brennan? Linda Brennan?" she asked. Her voice was gentle but official. "Yes? My name is Sarah Matsuda. I'm a social worker with Adult Protective Services. May I come in?" My stomach dropped. Adult Protective Services. That was for people who were being abused, neglected. That was for elderly people whose families locked them in rooms or stole their medication or left them sitting in their own filth. Not for me. Not for someone living in a nice house in a good neighborhood with a husband and kids and grandkids. Not for someone who'd taught children to read and volunteered at the community center and brought casseroles to neighbors when they were sick. What is this about? I'd prefer to discuss it inside if that's all right with you. I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to ask you some questions. Something in her voice, something kind but firm, made me undo the chain. I let her in anyway. Because that's what you do when someone official shows up at your door. You let them in and hope they go away quickly and everything goes back to normal. Sarah sat on my couch, right where Robert usually sat, and opened her folder. She took in the room with quick, assessing eyes, the photos on the mantel, the folded laundry, the muted TV, me in my too loose clothes with my too thin wrists. "Mrs. Brennan, we received a report from one of your neighbors expressing concern about your welfare. I know this might feel invasive, but I need to ask you some questions. You can refuse to answer any of them, and you can ask me to leave at any time, but I hope you'll talk to me. A neighbor. Who? Patricia. She was the only one I talked to regularly, but surely she wouldn't have called social services. Would she? I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. What must they think of me? What had they reported? Sarah's questions were gentle but pointed. How was my health? When was my last doctor's visit? Did I have access to my own bank accounts? Did I feel safe at home? Did anyone control what I could do or where I could go? Had anyone taken my money without my permission? I answered automatically at first, the responses I'd trained myself to give. I'm fine. Everything's fine. My husband handles our finances. Of course I feel safe. I can do whatever I want. Nobody's taken anything. But Sarah kept digging, kept asking, and her questions started to crack something open inside me. When was the last time I'd been to the doctor? I couldn't remember? 6 months? A year? Did I have my own debit card, or did I have to ask my husband for money? Well, I had to ask, but that was just because he managed everything. Could I access my bank accounts online if I wanted to? Theoretically, yes, but Robert had all the passwords. Finally, she said, Mrs. Brennan, I need to be direct with you. We have reason to believe you may be experiencing financial exploitation. Would you be willing to let me review your bank statements? Financial exploitation. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and burning. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it, to show her how ridiculous this all was. Financial exploitation happened to vulnerable people, confused people, people without families who cared about them. It didn't happen to me. But instead, I heard myself say, okay. She walked me through accessing my accounts online, something Robert had always claimed was too complicated for me to bother with. The interface is confusing, he'd said. You'll just get frustrated. Let me handle it. But it wasn't complicated at all. My name was right there on the accounts. Linda Brennan, joint account holder. The password reset function sent a code to my email, which I could access just fine. Within 10 minutes, we were looking at months of transactions I'd never seen. Transfers out, withdrawals, my Social Security checks, deposited faithfully every month on the third Wednesday, and then immediately moved to an account I didn't recognize. Not the next day, not the next week. Immediately, sometimes within hours. Do you know where this account is? Sarah asked, pointing to the screen. The account number was partially obscured for security, but I could see enough to know it wasn't our joint savings, wasn't our joint checking, wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. I shook my head. My throat felt like it was closing. The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Sarah clicked through more screens, her face carefully neutral in that way professionals have when they're looking at something terrible but don't want to alarm you. Mrs. Brennan, she said gently, over the past 18 months, approximately $42,000 has been transferred from your accounts to this external account. Did you authorize these transfers? $42,000. The number was so big it didn't seem real. 42,000. That was more than I'd made in a year as a teacher's aide. That was more than our first car had cost, more than the down payment on this house. That was money that could have paid for the grandkids' college, could have covered medical expenses, could have given me security and options and freedom, and it was just gone. The room tilted again, harder this time. I gripped the armrest of my chair to keep from sliding off, my knuckles white, my breathing shallow. I need you to understand something, Sarah continued, and her voice was soft but steady, an anchor in the chaos. This is not your fault, but what's happening to you, this is financial abuse, and you deserve better than this. You deserve better than this. When was the last time someone had said those words to me? When was the last time I'd said them to myself? When had I stopped believing that I deserved anything at all? I started crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of someone who's sad, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone whose entire reality is crumbling. My nose ran, my face contorted. I couldn't catch my breath. 32 years of marriage, reduced to a bank statement and the word exploitation. Sarah handed me tissues and waited, not rushing me, not trying to fix it, just sitting there in the wreckage of my delusions. She'd probably seen this before, probably sat with dozens of women like me, women who'd trusted and believed and sacrificed and ended up sobbing at their kitchen tables while strangers documented their destruction. "What do I do?" I finally asked when I could speak again. My voice came out hoarse, broken. "First," she said, "we document everything." That night, Robert came home to find me at the kitchen table with printouts of our bank statements spread out in front of me. Sarah had left hours ago, but I'd kept printing, kept organizing, kept staring at the evidence of my own willful blindness. Every transaction told a story. Every transfer was a lie. Every month for 18 months, my trust had been converted into his theft. I'd organized them chronologically, highlighted the suspicious transfers in yellow, made notes in the margins. The teacher's aide in me had emerged, methodical, thorough, determined to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. "What's all this?" Robert asked, his tone light, casual, like he'd come home to find me working on a jigsaw puzzle instead of uncovering his crimes. "Where's our money, Robert?" He sighed, like I was being tiresome, like I was that demanding wife he had to placate. Set down his keys on the counter with a clink, loosened his collar. "We've been over this, Linda." "No," I said, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. "We haven't. Show me the account you moved it to. Show me the better interest rate. Show me proof that this money still exists and belongs to us. I don't have to justify myself to you." There it was, the truth he'd been hiding behind the condescension and deflection. I don't have to justify myself to you, like I was nobody. Like I had no right to ask questions about my own money, my own life, my own future. "Yes," I said, "you do. Because it's my money too, my Social Security, my savings, my name on these accounts." His face changed then. The mask of patient husband dealing with his difficult wife slipped, and underneath was something cold and contemptuous. Something that might have always been there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it didn't have to hide anymore. "Your money? You think that pittance you get each month is yours? I've been supporting your lazy ass for 30 years. The words hit like physical blows. Lazy. After raising 3 kids, working full-time, taking care of his mother, running the household, enabling his entire existence. After cooking and cleaning and organizing and managing everything that allowed him to go to work and come home and never have to think about whether there was food in the refrigerator or toilet paper in the bathroom or birthday cards for his own children. Lazy. After subordinating my own needs, my own health, my own personhood to make his life comfortable. After becoming so small and quiet and undemanding that I'd almost disappeared. "Get out," I said. He laughed. Actually laughed. The same laugh I'd hear 3 months later in that courtroom. "This is my house. Then I'll leave." I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked to the door. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the knob, but I did it. Years of people-pleasing and conflict avoidance and making myself small, and somehow I found the strength to turn that knob and walk out. I walked out of that house and got in my car and drove to Patricia's. My whole body was shaking. I could barely see the road through my tears. But I drove the 6 blocks to her house, pulled into her driveway, and sat there with the engine running, trying to catch my breath. She opened the door in her bathrobe before I could even get out of the car. Must have seen the headlights. Must have known something was wrong. She came down the driveway in her slippers and opened my car door and pulled me out and into her arms. I told her everything. Every missing dollar, every dismissive comment, every time I'd ignored my instincts to keep the peace. We sat at her kitchen table until 2 a.m, and she listened without interrupting, without judging, without once suggesting I should give Robert another chance or try to work it out or think about the family. When I finished, she said, "You're staying here. Tonight and as long as you need, the guest room is yours." That's when I knew Patricia had been the one to call Adult Protective Services. And instead of being angry, I felt grateful. Someone had seen me when I'd made myself invisible. Someone had cared enough to intervene when I couldn't save myself. The next morning, Sarah called. "How are you doing?" "I left," I said. "I'm staying with a friend." "Good. That's good, Linda." I could hear the relief in her voice. "Now, are you ready to fight back?" Was I? I'd spent so long avoiding conflict, prioritizing harmony, that the idea of fighting felt foreign, aggressive, unladylike, all the things I'd been taught not to be. But something had shifted in me during that confrontation with Robert. When he'd laughed at me, when he'd called me lazy, when he'd shown me exactly how little he valued everything I'd given him, something had cracked open inside me. And what came pouring out wasn't sadness or fear. It was rage, cold, clarifying rage. The kind that burns away everything except the truth. The kind that makes you wonder why you ever settled for being treated as less than human. "Yes," I told Sarah. "I'm ready." She explained the process. We'd need documentation, bank statements, emails, any written communication about finances. We'd need to establish a pattern of exploitation and manipulation. We might need to involve law enforcement. It could get ugly. Robert would fight back. Our private business would become public record. "I've already started," I said, thinking of the printouts still on Robert's kitchen table, my highlighted notes, my methodical breakdown of 18 months of theft. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own life. Sarah connected me with a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she was exactly what I needed. Sharp, no nonsense, with eyes that had seen every trick abusers pull and a determination to hold them accountable. Together, we built a case. Every unexplained withdrawal became evidence. Every transfer to that mysterious account became proof of systematic theft. Every time Robert had dismissed my concerns or made me feel crazy for asking questions became part of a pattern. The mysterious account, it turned out, belonged to Robert. A personal account he'd opened without telling me at a bank across town under his name only. He'd been funneling not just my Social Security checks, but also disbursements from our retirement savings. Money I'd earned through my years of work, money that was supposed to secure our future. He'd been building himself a nest egg for a future that apparently didn't include me. My lawyer, Margaret, explained that what Robert had done was criminal. "This isn't a gray area," she said during our first meeting in her downtown office. "This is theft, pure and simple. The fact that you're married doesn't give him the right to take your money without your knowledge or consent." But proving it in court required more than just bank statements. We needed to demonstrate a pattern of control and manipulation, a systematic effort to isolate me from my own finances and make me dependent on him. That's where my documentation came in. Sarah had taught me to write everything down, dates, times, conversations, how they made me feel. I filled a notebook with memories I'd tried to suppress. The time he'd screamed at me for buying new shoes, $30 sneakers from Walmart because my old ones had holes, because we couldn't afford luxuries while he was secretly spending thousands on who knows what. The time he'd refused to let me see our tax returns because I wouldn't understand them anyway. The time he'd mocked me in front of the kids for asking about our retirement account made me seem like a nag who couldn't trust him. The countless small humiliations that, taken together, painted a picture of systematic abuse. I also started seeing a therapist. Sarah insisted. "You've been through trauma," she said. "You need support processing this." Dr. Evans was in her 60s, soft-spoken, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her office smelled like lavender and had comfortable chairs and boxes of tissues strategically placed around the room. In our first session, she asked me to describe my marriage. I gave her the highlight reel, the good years, the kids, the milestones. The wedding where my father walked me down the aisle and Robert cried when he saw me. The births of our children, the family vacations, the anniversaries. She listened, nodding, and then asked, "What about the parts you left out?" "What do you mean?" the spaces between the highlights. What was daily life like? And suddenly I was crying again, telling her about the constant walking on eggshells, never knowing what mood Robert would be in when he came home. Would he be charming Robert, the one who told jokes and played with the kids? Or would he be angry Robert, the one who slammed doors and found fault with everything I did? The way he'd blame me for his anger, make me responsible for his happiness. If dinner wasn't ready on time, I'd ruined his evening. If I was tired and didn't want to socialize, I was making him look bad. If I spent money on myself, I was being selfish. But if I asked him to account for his spending, I was controlling and paranoid. The isolation that had crept in so gradually, I hadn't noticed it until I was completely alone. How he'd discourage me from spending time with friends. "Do you really need to go to book club again? You just went last month," until I stopped going. How he'd criticize my family. "Your sister is so dramatic," or "Your mother always has something to complain about," until I saw them less and less. How he'd position himself as the only person I could really trust, the only one who really understood me, until my entire world revolved around him. "Linda," Dr. Evans said gently, "what you're describing is coercive control. It's a pattern of behavior designed to make you dependent and compliant. It's a form of abuse." Coercive control. Another term I'd never heard in reference to my own life. Another frame for understanding what had been done to me. I'd heard about physical abuse, about women with black eyes and broken bones. But this quiet, systematic dismantling of my autonomy and self-worth. I hadn't known there was a name for it. Living with Patricia was like remembering how to breathe. She didn't interrogate me or make demands. She just offered me space and safety. Her spare bedroom became my sanctuary. I'd wake up in the morning without that immediate dread, that need to assess Robert's mood before I could plan my day. I could eat breakfast when I was hungry, not when someone else expected it. I could watch TV shows I actually wanted to watch instead of whatever Robert had chosen. I could go to bed early without being accused of being antisocial or stay up late reading without being told I was wasting electricity. Patricia introduced me to her book club, a group of women who met every Tuesday night. They knew my situation. Apparently, everyone knew everything in that circle. But they didn't treat me like a victim. They didn't tiptoe around me or speak in hushed, pitying tones. They treated me like a person. We talked about books and politics and our kids and our frustrations. Normal things. Human things. One of the women, Diane, pulled me aside after a meeting. She was in her late 50s. Tall and elegant, with silver hair she wore short and stylish. "I went through something similar," she said quietly. "Different details, same pattern. If you need someone to talk to who gets it, I'm here." I took her up on that offer. Diane and I started meeting for coffee once a week at a little cafe downtown, and she helped me understand that what I was experiencing, the shame, the self-doubt, the anger, was normal. Expected even. "You're going to have moments," she warned me over lattes one Saturday morning, "where you convince yourself you're overreacting, where you think about going back, where you remember the good times and forget why you left. Don't. Just write it out. Call me if you need to, but don't go back." She was right. There were days when I missed the familiarity of my old life, even the painful parts. Days when I questioned whether I was being too harsh, whether I should give Robert another chance, whether our 32 years together deserved one more attempt at reconciliation. But then I'd look at my bank statements, at the evidence of his systematic theft, and the clarity would return. This wasn't about one mistake or one bad decision. This was 18 months of deliberate, calculated theft, and probably longer than that, if I was honest. Probably years of smaller thefts I hadn't noticed, hadn't documented, couldn't prove. The legal process moved slowly. Depositions, meetings, more documentation. Margaret was building an airtight case, but it required patience. She interviewed the kids, talked to Patricia, reviewed medical records that showed my declining health. She hired a forensic accountant who traced every dollar Robert had taken and where it had gone. Some of it had been gambled away. Robert had apparently developed a habit of going to the casino on his golf days. Some had been spent on a woman I'd never heard of, someone he'd been seeing for the better part of a year. Dinners at expensive restaurants, hotel rooms, jewelry I'd never received. That revelation hurt in a different way than the financial theft. It wasn't just about money. It was about the whole fabric of our marriage being a lie. While I was taking care of his mother and our grandkids and our home, he was building an entire separate life. Meanwhile, Robert had hired his own lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit named Thomas Bradford who specialized in protecting assets in contentious divorces. He tried to paint me as a confused old woman who didn't understand how marital finances worked, who'd given permission for everything Robert had done and then forgotten about it in my declining mental state. That strategy backfired spectacularly during my deposition when I calmly walked through every transaction, every date, every lie. I'd prepared for weeks with Margaret, memorizing the timeline, organizing my thoughts, anticipating every attack. Robert's lawyer kept trying to rattle me, to make me seem unreliable. "Mrs. Brennan, isn't it true that you have trouble remembering things lately? Haven't you been experiencing some confusion? Didn't you tell your husband you trusted him to handle the finances?" But Sarah had coached me well. I stayed calm. I stuck to facts. And when he suggested I was exaggerating, I pulled out my notebook and read directly from it. Dates, times, exact quotes from conversations, evidence of a clear, organized mind that knew exactly what had been done to it. The judge ordered a temporary restraining order preventing Robert from accessing any of our joint accounts. His personal account, the one with my $42,000, was frozen pending the outcome of the case. He was also prohibited from selling or transferring any jointly owned property, including the house. That's when Robert started calling. At first, they were angry calls. How dare I humiliate him like this? Did I want to destroy our family? What would the kids think? What would people at church say? I was being vindictive, cruel, unreasonable. Then the calls turned pleading. He was sorry. He'd made mistakes. We could work this out. He loved me. Didn't 32 years mean anything? Couldn't I find it in my heart to forgive him? I didn't answer. Sarah had warned me not to engage, and I'd learned to trust her guidance. But I listened to the voicemails, heard the desperation in his voice, the manipulation and guilt-tripping, and felt nothing. That should have scared me, that emptiness where love used to be. Instead, it felt like freedom. The kids were harder to navigate. They knew something was wrong but didn't understand the full extent until I sat them down and explained everything. Michael, my oldest, was furious. I knew something was off. I should have pushed harder. I should have asked more questions. Emily cried. "Why didn't you tell us sooner, Mom? We could have helped." Tyler got quiet. He was always the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth things over. "Maybe Dad didn't realize what he was doing," he suggested hopefully. "Maybe there's an explanation we haven't heard." "There is an explanation," I said. "He's a thief, and he knew exactly what he was doing." Tyler flinched, but I didn't soften it. They needed to understand that this wasn't some misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated. Their father had looked me in the eye, taken my money, and lied about it for 18 months. Minimum. At a family dinner Robert orchestrated, probably hoping to rally the kids to his side, I decided to set a trap. Margaret had helped me prepare, identifying specific discrepancies in the financial records that Robert couldn't explain without contradicting himself. The dinner was at a restaurant, neutral territory. Robert was playing the wounded husband, talking about how much he missed me, how he wanted to fix things. The kids were uncomfortable but polite, clearly hoping this would somehow lead to reconciliation and their family being whole again. And then I started asking questions. "Robert, you said you moved our savings to an account with a better interest rate. What bank was that with?" He hesitated just for a second. "First National." "And what was the account number?" I don't remember off the top of my head. Who memorizes account numbers? That's okay. I pulled the records. The only account at First National is our joint checking, which you've been systematically draining. So where's the savings account? His face went red. I don't have to answer your questions in front of the kids. Actually, I said, I think they deserve to know where their college funds went. Because those transfers you made? Some of them came from the accounts we set up for Michael, Emily, and Tyler. The accounts we promised would help with their kids' education. The table went silent. The waiter who'd been approaching backed away. The kids stared at him, their father, their hero, the man who'd taught them to ride bikes and helped with homework and walked Emily down the aisle at her wedding. Michael's voice was quiet, dangerous. You took our kids' college money? Robert opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. It was just temporary. I was going to pay it back. With what? I asked. The money you were spending at the casino? The money you were spending on your girlfriend? Emily gasped. Tyler went pale. Michael stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I can't believe you! He walked out, and Emily followed, tears streaming down her face. Tyler stayed a moment longer, looking between us, and I could see him trying to make sense of it, trying to find a way to make this okay, but there wasn't one. Finally, he shook his head and left too. Robert turned on me then, his voice low and venomous. You've destroyed this family. You happy now? No, I said. You did that all by yourself. I learned later that the average person experiencing financial exploitation in a relationship tries to leave 7 times before finally succeeding. 7 times. I'd been lucky, or maybe unlucky, that it only took me once. But that's because I had Sarah, Patricia, Margaret, Dr. Evans, a whole network of people who believed me and supported me when I couldn't support myself. Not everyone has that. Not everyone has a friend who calls Adult Protective Services. Not everyone has access to lawyers and therapists and safe places to stay. Studies calculate that injuries from elder abuse cost $3 billion to American hospitals per year. $5.3 billion. That's how common this is. That's how many people are suffering in silence, prioritizing family unity over their own welfare, believing that loyalty is more valuable than justice. I almost became one of those statistics. The headaches I'd been ignoring. Stress-induced migraines that could have led to a stroke, according to Dr. Kim, when I finally went for a checkup. The weight loss? Depression and anxiety manifesting physically, depleting my body of nutrients it needed. My doctor was alarmed when she saw me, immediately ordered blood work and a full physical. Linda, you're depleted. Your iron levels are dangerously low. Your blood pressure is through the roof. Your cortisol levels indicate chronic stress. How long have you been living like this? Too long. Way too long. The court date arrived on a Tuesday, 3 months after Sarah first knocked on my door. I dressed carefully that morning, a blue suit Patricia helped me pick out, sensible heels, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look competent, credible, like someone whose testimony should be believed. Margaret had coached me on what to expect, how to present myself, what questions I might face. But nothing could have prepared me for seeing Robert walk into that courtroom with his lawyer, looking like the victim. He'd lost weight too, I noticed. Was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. Looked older somehow, diminished. The proceedings were formal and strange. Legal language I barely understood. Procedures that felt designed to confuse. But Margaret was fierce, presenting our documentation with precision. Bank statements showing the systematic transfers. My notebook with its careful documentation. Testimony from Sarah about the state she'd found me in. Malnourished, anxious, living in fear. Records from my doctor confirming the physical toll. Testimony from Patricia about how I'd lost weight and isolated myself. Statements from the kids about changes they'd noticed but hadn't understood. Robert's lawyer tried the confused old woman angle again. Suggested I'd given permission for the transfers and forgotten. Implied I was mentally declining and didn't remember our conversations about finances. produced a few old notes where I'd signed checks or agreed to financial decisions, trying to establish a pattern of me deferring to Robert's judgment. That's when Margaret played her trump card. Security footage from our bank showing Robert, alone, making withdrawals and transfers. Dates and times when he'd told me he was at the hardware store or meeting friends for lunch or playing golf. Visual proof of his deception, of him accessing our joint accounts without my knowledge. And that's when he laughed. Right there in the courtroom, as the footage played on the screen at the front of the room, Robert actually laughed, like it was all some big joke, like my pain and betrayal were entertaining to him, like he couldn't believe he'd been caught, or maybe like he couldn't believe I'd had the audacity to fight back. The judge's face hardened. I watched her make a note, watched her jaw tighten. When Robert's lawyer tried to object to something, to claim the footage was taken out of context, she cut him off. "Counsel, I've seen enough." Her ruling was swift and comprehensive. Robert was ordered to return all funds he'd taken, not just the $42,000 from my Social Security and savings, but also the money from the kids' college funds, plus interest calculated from the date of each transfer. He was to have no access to any joint accounts. The court recognized his actions as financial abuse and elder exploitation, which carried criminal charges if the district attorney chose to pursue them. But the judge went further. She ordered him to pay my legal fees, every penny Margaret had charged, every hour she'd spent building my case. She ordered a forensic audit of all our accounts going back 5 years to see if the theft extended further than we'd documented. And she issued a protection order preventing him from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of Patricia's house. "Mr. Brennan," the judge said, looking directly at him, "I've been on this bench for 22 years, and I've seen a lot of financial abuse cases. What you did to your wife is among the most calculated and cruel I've encountered. You systematically isolated her from her own resources, gaslit her when she asked questions, and stole money she'd earned through her own labor. The fact that you're laughing about it in my courtroom tells me everything I need to know about your character. You should be ashamed of yourself." Robert's face went white. His lawyer looked stunned, probably not used to judges editorializing quite so bluntly. And I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was justice. Real, tangible, legal justice. Someone in authority had seen what happened to me and called it what it was: abuse. Outside the courthouse, Margaret hugged me. "You did it, Linda. You stood up for yourself and you won." But winning didn't feel like I'd expected. It didn't feel like triumph or vindication. It felt quiet, steady, like the ground had finally stopped shifting under my feet. I wasn't celebrating. I was just breathing. Just existing in a body that was mine again, in a life that was mine again. The money came back slowly, processed through the courts. With it came letters from Robert's lawyer trying to negotiate, to reduce the amounts, to work out payment plans. Margaret shot them all down. We'd won, and we weren't giving an inch. The court order was clear: full restitution with interest within 90 days, or Robert would face criminal charges. The kids processed it differently. Michael cut off contact with his father completely. "I can't have a relationship with someone who would do that to you," he told me. "I can't look at him the same way." Emily maintained minimal contact, mostly text messages, keeping him at arm's length. She brought the kids to see him occasionally, supervised visits that she kept short and tightly controlled. Tyler tried to maintain a relationship with both of us, which I understood even if it hurt sometimes. He'd have dinner with Robert, then come to my apartment looking exhausted and sad. "He's still my dad," Tyler said when I asked him about it one evening. We were sitting on my balcony watching the sunset, and he'd just come from having lunch with Robert. "I know," I said, "and I'd never ask you to choose. Just protect yourself, okay? Don't let him do to you what he did to me. Don't lend him money. Don't give him access to your accounts. Don't trust him with anything important." Tyler promised he wouldn't. Time would tell if he could keep that promise. I moved out of Patricia's house 6 months after the court ruling. Not back to the house I'd shared with Robert. That got sold. And we split the proceeds according to the court order, but to a small apartment in a complex full of women around my age. Single women, divorced women, widows, women who'd lived whole lives and had stories to tell. My apartment was on the second floor with a balcony that faced west. I could watch the sunset without Robert's commentary, without having to justify my enjoyment or explain why I was wasting time standing outside doing nothing. The desert sky turned pink and orange and purple, and I could just watch. Just be. I furnished it with things I actually liked, not things that matched Robert's taste or fit some image of what a proper home should look like. A bright blue couch because it made me happy. Art from local galleries showing desert landscapes and abstract colors. Plants. So many plants. Because I'd always wanted a green space and Robert had always complained about the mess. I got a cat. A cranky orange tabby from the shelter who'd been there for months because nobody wanted an old grumpy cat with a torn ear and an attitude problem. We were perfect for each other. I named him Chester, and he slept on my bed and demanded attention on his schedule, and I loved him fiercely. The women in my building became my tribe. We had weekly dinners, rotating apartments, everyone bringing something to share. We went to movies and museums. We traveled together. A group trip to Santa Fe that felt like the first vacation I'd taken in decades, where I could just enjoy myself without managing someone else's experience. We supported each other through health scares and family drama and the ordinary challenges of living. When one woman's daughter was going through a divorce, we rallied around her. When another had surgery, we organized meal trains and rides to appointments. We created the community and support system I'd been missing for years. Diane became my closest friend. She understood the journey in a way others couldn't, had walked the same path of discovering abuse and choosing to leave. We'd meet for coffee on Saturday mornings and talk about the work of rebuilding. Because that's what it was. Work. Not something that happened naturally or automatically, but an active, deliberate process of constructing a new life from the rubble of the old one. I feel guilty sometimes, I admitted to her one morning, for being happy, like I shouldn't enjoy my freedom this much, like enjoying it means the marriage wasn't real, or I didn't really love him. That's the manipulation still talking, Diane said. He trained you to feel guilty for your own joy, to second-guess your own feelings. But you're allowed to be happy, Linda. You're allowed to thrive. Your happiness doesn't invalidate the real parts of your marriage, and it doesn't mean you didn't love him. It just means you love yourself enough to leave when love wasn't enough anymore. Thriving felt like a strong word, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe this quiet apartment, this chosen family, this life built on my own terms, was exactly what thriving looked like. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women navigate the legal system. Sarah had connected me with the organization, thinking my experience might help others. It was hard sometimes, seeing myself in these younger women, watching them struggle with the same doubts and fears I'd had. But it was also empowering to say, I understand, I've been there, and I can help you through this. One woman, Maria, reminded me so much of my younger self. She'd sit in the consultation room, twisting her wedding ring, making excuses for her husband. He's just stressed about money, she'd say. He doesn't mean to get angry. He works so hard to provide for us. Does he have access to your bank accounts? I asked gently. She hesitated. Yes, but that's normal, right? We're married. Does he explain where the money goes? Not really, but he's the breadwinner, so it makes sense that he manages it. I recognized that logic. I'd used it myself, so I told her my story, not to pressure her, but to show her what could happen if she didn't protect herself. And I watched something shift in her face, the same shift I'd felt when Sarah first used the words financial abuse. Recognition, understanding, the first crack in the denial. What should I do? Maria asked, her voice small and scared. First, document everything, I said, and I taught her how, the same way Sarah had taught me. How to access her bank accounts, how to take screenshots, how to write down conversations with dates and details, how to build a case if she ever needed one. Dr. Evans and I still met monthly. The work wasn't done, probably would never be completely done. We'd moved past the crisis stage into what she called integration, making sense of what happened, incorporating it into my narrative without letting it define me. "You're not just a survivor," she said during one session. "You're a whole person who survived something terrible. There's a difference." I was starting to understand that difference, starting to see myself as more than my trauma, more than my mistakes, more than the years I'd spent in a harmful marriage. I was Linda Brennan, 60 years old, former teacher's aide, volunteer, friend, mother, grandmother. I liked mystery novels and spicy food and long walks in the evening when the heat broke. I was learning to paint, badly but joyfully. I was planning a trip to see the Grand Canyon, something I'd always wanted to do. On my 60th birthday, the women from my building threw me a surprise party. They decorated my apartment with balloons and streamers, baked a cake, chocolate with raspberry filling, my favorite. They bought presents, a new journal with a leather cover, a soft throw blanket in teal, gift cards to my favorite coffee shop, a beautiful potted orchid. Small things, inexpensive things, but the gesture behind them was enormous. "Speech!" someone called, and they all laughed and echoed it, clinking their wine glasses. I stood there, surrounded by these women who'd become my family, and felt tears prick my eyes. Happy tears this time. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing me, for believing me, for helping me become someone I actually like." "To Linda," Patricia raised her glass, "who taught us all that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." They toasted, and I toasted back, and Chester jumped onto the coffee table to investigate the cake, and everyone laughed. It was perfect. Not the birthday I'd imagined when I was younger, when I thought I'd be celebrating with my husband and kids and grandkids around some big table in the house we'd grown old in together. But perfect in its own way. Real, honest, mine. Robert tried to contact me a few times over that first year. Letters that my lawyer intercepted and copied for our records. Phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize that I learned not to answer. He wanted to talk, to explain, to ask for forgiveness. He was going to therapy now, he claimed. He understood what he'd done wrong. He wanted another chance. But I had nothing to say to him. The man I'd married, or the man I'd thought I'd married, didn't exist, had never existed. And the man who'd stolen from me, lied to me, diminished me for years, I owed him nothing, not my time, not my forgiveness, not another second of my energy. The restraining order eventually expired, but I renewed it anyway. Better safe than sorry. Better to have that legal boundary than to rely on his good behavior, which had proven non-existent. The grandkids were harder to navigate. Robert had visitation rights, and sometimes the kids would share photos or stories that reminded me I'd been erased from parts of my own family's life. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to because having both of us there would be too awkward. Holiday gatherings where he played the doting grandfather and nobody mentioned what he'd done. It stung. But I'd learned that I couldn't control other people's relationships with him. I could only control my own boundaries. Emily brought the grandkids to visit me sometimes, always with an apology. "I'm sorry it's complicated, Mom." "I know," I said. "You're doing your best." And she was. They all were. Trying to maintain relationships with both parents in a situation that didn't have a clean resolution. I didn't envy them that position. But I also didn't let guilt pull me back into a relationship that had nearly destroyed me. 2 years after the court ruling, I got a letter from Robert's lawyer informing me that Robert had filed for divorce. After everything, after all this time, he wanted to make it official. My first instinct was to feel hurt. How dare he be the one to file? How dare he take that final measure of control? But then I realized it didn't matter. The marriage had ended that day I walked out, that moment I chose myself over the comfortable lie we'd been living. This was just paperwork, just the legal system catching up with reality. Margaret handled it. Community property state, So we split what remained of our assets 50-50. The house was already sold. The retirement accounts divided per the court order. There was no custody to negotiate, no ongoing financial entanglement beyond what had already been settled. It was mechanical, transactional. Nothing like the emotional devastation of the financial abuse trial. When the divorce was finalized, I didn't feel relieved or sad. I felt nothing. He was just a stranger now, someone I used to know. The worst thing he'd ever done to me was already over, already survived. This was just the epilogue. I started dating, cautiously, with firm boundaries. Nothing serious, just coffee with men I met through friends or the senior center. It was strange at first, navigating attraction and trust after everything, wondering if I'd ever be able to let someone in again, wondering if I even wanted to. Dr. Evans helped me identify red flags I'd ignored before. Control disguised as care, isolation masked as intimacy, financial pressure presented as partnership. "You're not the same person who married Robert," she reminded me. "You have wisdom now. Trust yourself to use it." One man, David, seemed promising. A widower, kind, respected boundaries. We went on several dates, had interesting conversations about books and travel and our kids. But when he suggested combining finances for convenience, "It just makes eating out easier if we have a joint card," I ended it. "I'm not ready for that," I said. "It's just practical," he argued. "It doesn't mean anything." "Then you'll understand why I'm saying no." He didn't understand, got defensive, accused me of being damaged and overly suspicious, which told me everything I needed to know about him. Someone who truly respected my autonomy wouldn't call my boundaries damage, wouldn't push when I said no, wouldn't make me feel broken for protecting myself. I was fine alone, better than fine. I was building a life that felt stable and safe and entirely my own. If partnership came someday, it would be an addition to that life, not the foundation of it. I'd learned that lesson too painfully to forget it. Before I finish my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something that might save someone else the pain I went through. Financial abuse is one of the most common forms of elder abuse, but it's also one of the least talked about. We're taught to respect our elders, to trust family members, to value loyalty and discretion. Those are good values, but abusers exploit them. They count on silence. They depend on shame, keeping their victims isolated. So here's what I learned, and what I wish someone had told me years ago. First, you have the right to access your own money, always. If someone, even your spouse, is preventing you from seeing bank statements, making you justify every purchase, or moving money without your knowledge or consent, that's a red flag. You don't need to understand every detail of your finances, but you should have full access and transparency. Second, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I ignored my instincts for months, telling myself I was being paranoid or difficult. But that feeling in your stomach when things don't add up? That's your subconscious recognizing patterns your conscious mind is trying to excuse. Listen to it. Third, document everything. Keep copies of important papers. Take screenshots of bank statements. Write down conversations that concern you, with dates and details. You might never need this documentation, but if you do, it becomes your proof. It becomes your power. Fourth, financial abuse rarely exists in isolation. It usually comes with emotional abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, isolation. If someone is controlling your money, they're probably controlling other aspects of your life too. Look at the whole pattern, not just the individual incidents. Fifth, asking for help is not weakness. I thought I had to handle everything alone, that admitting I needed support meant I'd failed somehow. But the only reason I survived was because people like Sarah and Patricia and Margaret stepped in. There are resources, adult protective services, legal aid societies, domestic violence organizations that help with financial abuse too. Use them. Sixth, your health matters. The stress of financial abuse takes a physical toll. Don't ignore symptoms. Don't postpone medical care. Don't minimize your own suffering. Research shows that financial abuse can be as damaging to mental health as physical abuse, and it absolutely affects your body too. Seventh, you can recover. I know it doesn't feel like it when you're in the middle of it. I know it seems impossible that you'll ever feel whole again. But with support and time and work, you can build a new life. It won't be the life you planned. It might not be the life you wanted, but it can be good, really good, unexpectedly good. And finally, speaking up matters. I volunteer at that shelter because my story might help someone recognize their own situation. I'm telling you all this because maybe someone listening needs permission to leave, needs proof that survival is possible, needs to hear that they're not alone. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. And you deserve better than this. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it was long, and I appreciate you giving me your time and attention. Wherever you are right now, whether you're listening at home or during your commute or while you're doing chores, thank you for being here. If this story resonated with you, if you connected with anything I shared, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button. It helps other people find these stories, and who knows? Maybe someone who needs to hear this will find it because you engaged with it. And I want to ask you something, because I'm genuinely curious. What would you have done in my place? Would you have left sooner, stayed longer, handled the confrontation differently? Tell me in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to hear your perspective. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing it.